The North China Herald is probably the most important single foreign language newspaper published in China in the 19th or 20th centuries. It was first published in 1850 in Shanghai. It was founded by a man called Henry Sherman. It last appeared in 1951 when it was closed down by the communist authorities. But apart from the 4 years of the Pacific War, it was published regularly from 1850. It circulated eventually across the country and split into two publications, the North China Daily News and the North China Herald. The North China Herald went in the 1920s to about 2,500 to 3,000 correspondents across China, and was the closest we have to a national English language newspaper for China across the period. It has many strengths as a resource. It's a fund of information about trade, politics, social affairs, diplomatic affairs, local events and national events, births, marriages, deaths, murders, suicides. It's all there. Local crime in Shanghai, national tragedies such as the Tianjin massacre in 1817 or the Boxer uprising in North China in the 1900s. It grew in size to be at least sometimes 80 or 90 pages by the turn of the 20th century. And what the North China Herald did as a weekly edition was reprint much of the daily issues of the North China Daily News, so that you get a fairly comprehensive reprinting of the daily newspaper in the weekly, but it has its own additional articles and news items as well. It had a network of correspondents nationally. These were missionaries or customs officials or diplomats or local traders. So you will find a section, for example, fairly regularly towards the end of the 19th century and onwards, called Letters from the Outports. And you will find a Wuhu letter or a letter from Nanning, and you will find a roundup of local news as it affects the foreign community, but not only in that city or in that province in the last two or 3 months. The contributions are unsigned, but we know that many of the very prominent figures in the history of the foreign presence in China wrote for the magazine. Prominent missionaries and scholars and diplomats and businessmen, whether it's Archibald Little, who pioneered steamship sailing on the upper Yangtze, W.A.P. Martin, and many, many others. So although we have no record of who wrote what, unfortunately, we know that it was a very important forum for different opinions and different voices about events in China and beyond China as well. It's based in Shanghai, obviously. It looks to Shanghai, it looks across China, but it looks across East Asia, and it does look globally. There's a wealth of information there, for example, about China's participation in the First World War and how global events like World War I or the developing conflict in Europe affect China and affect Shanghai. So it's a fantastic record both of official life at different levels, diplomatic exchanges and disagreements, local official life, in Shanghai especially, the activities of the Shanghai Municipal Council within the international settlement. It's a record of crime. It has lots of reports from different consular courts, but also the mixed court, the court established to deal with incidents and crimes and and other encounters between foreigners and Chinese. But it has a great deal of information about individuals, individual lives and deaths in China between 1850 and when it ceased publication. So it's a source of hard data. It had various supplements in its early years. At the back of the newspaper you will always find a list of ships in port, ships which have just left, their cargoes, their owners, and scholars have waded through the hard copy pages of this before constructing databases to try and understand flows of trade. But with the digital version, of course, you can do this much more easily. But you can also find out a lot more about the individuals and the companies concerned from the pages of the newspaper. It has some limitations. In later years, it didn't really write about, for example, the French concession at Shanghai so much. So it does develop perhaps slightly more of a focus on Anglophone life and culture when it reports on the foreign community. But it is always the key record, or the key newspaper of record for foreigners who are living and working in China or observing China from abroad. The copy of the run of the North China Herald, which has been digitised by Brill, actually comes from the library of the School of Oriental and African Studies, and was originally, it came from the British Museum and the British Library, originally it was the Foreign Office copy of this newspaper. So it was an important record for foreign diplomats back in the UK for what was going on in China.